As I was talking about Sherrod Brown, but we've also been to J.D. Vance's office with the same message that we need a ceasefire in Palestine. So, thank you. I'm not from Reno. And now, yeah, I warmed up the crowd to Pastor Doug. Now, Doug Horner will be introducing our speaker, Reverend John Deere. Thank you.
Reverend John Deere is an internationally recognized voice and leader for peace and nonviolence. A priest, activist, and author, he served for years as a director of Fellowship of Reconciliation, the author of 40 books, including They Will Inherit the Earth and Lazarus Come Forth. Father John is founder and director of the Beatitudes Center for the Nonviolent Jesus, where he hosts and offers virtual workshops on Jesus and nonviolence. He was nominated several times for the Nobel Peace Prize, including by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and he lives in California. And if we clap really loud, we're going to get him to pull himself away from the table where he's signing books and come in here and speak. So if we could just give a round of applause for John Deere. John! And he's getting up now, and he's wandering. This is for you, brother.
Hi, everybody. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for welcoming me. I was meeting people outside, and Doug kept trying to get me to come inside, and I kept trying to avoid Doug. And it didn't work. This is, it just was a little too imposing for me, so I thought I'd be down here, and I'm going to keep moving, sorry. But I'm reminded of the, being here at this gorgeous, spectacular church, the famous Pilgrim Church, of the young ministers giving his first sermon, and he's very nervous, and he comes to the microphone and says, "Something's wrong with this microphone," and the congregation goes, "And also with you." That's my best joke, everybody. It's going to be rough. That didn't really cheer everybody up, I can tell. Well, I really want to thank Doug, wherever you went, Doug, for inviting me, and Cleveland Peace Action, and Reverend George, the pastor here at Pilgrim Church. How about a round of applause for them for bringing me in? Thank you, George, for welcoming me. I'm on a 5-month, 65-city speaking tour around the country. I left on January 31st. And I'm in a different city every day talking about this big new book that I wrote, The Gospel of Peace, a commentary on Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I really thank you for getting a copy of it, and maybe getting a copy for especially a priest and minister or bishop here in Ohio, to try to educate them on Jesus and peacemaking and nonviolence. And if I don't say anything, I just want to say thank you so much for all the great good that all of you do for peace and for justice, for Cleveland, for Peace Action, and for our poor world. And I just want to encourage you to keep at it. Just let's keep going no matter what. So I was, I had just moved to California. I'm 64 and have been full-time for peace and justice my whole life, as maybe some of you know, and I met some of you before. But when the pandemic hit, and I had just moved into, somebody gave me a cottage just south of Big Sur on 1,000 acres on the ocean. What could I do? I mean, just to be polite, I had to take it. And then the pandemic hit, and so I started to write this commentary, which is, I really wanted to write a 4-volume box set on the Gospels. What's not to like? But the publisher said, no, you can't do John. Only the Synoptic Gospels, no longer than 500 pages. Somebody has to stop you. I'm trying to make you laugh, and it's not working. I can tell already. And so a year ago, I put out the word, would anybody like to invite me to speak? And I immediately had 60 invitations, and then Doug wrote me not too long ago. But so I'm happy to be here. I was in Detroit yesterday for my friend Bishop Tom Gumbleton's funeral, and I'm going to Canada tomorrow, which is very exciting because I'm not allowed in Canada. I'm sure a lot of you aren't either, you know. I am arrested 85 times. I have many felony convictions, like I presume all of you do, for civil disobedience against war and nuclear weapons. And I'm highly monitored by the government and can't vote. And I'm just waiting one of these days for them to arrest me, and so I don't have to give the speech. But, you know, we'll see. I think they don't want to. But anyway, so what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about where I'm coming from, especially in light of this book, which is Nonviolence in Jesus, and then say a word about Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then our work for peace. And I'll talk for a while and we can have a conversation. I'm happy to talk about anything that's on your mind about any of these questions. And then by the end, we will have resolved everything. Is that okay? That's the plan. And it's such a beautiful place, and you're also nonviolent, and it's Sunday afternoon, so if you need to lie down and take a nap, you've got those beautiful cushions there. So I am enamored by this clumsy word from Gandhi and Dr. King, nonviolence. And I am passionate that the peace and justice folk of our country need to reclaim that movement, that clumsy word, and apply it now more than ever as things get worse. And even to begin to experiment and come up with our own theology and spirituality of nonviolence. You know, the night before the government killed him, they said, Dr. King said, it's not violence or nonviolence. It's nonviolence or non-existence. And we're seeing that play out every day, and that's what you're trying to be about at Peace Action. I'm just sick and tired, as Martin said, of violence and war, and I'm not going to be part of it anymore, and neither are you. And we're just inundated. We always should be supposed to be killing somebody. Please kill somebody. No, that's just the whole point. That's why we're in a nice place like here, to get strength to go forward into the culture of war as gospel peacemakers. So Gandhi's using this clumsy word that none of us like, ahimsa, right, from Jainism and Hinduism. And, you know, it's such a lovely word, do no harm in thought, word, or deed. Okay, he's coming up with that 124 years ago at the turn of the century. Let's think about that for a minute. You're the famous holy peacemakers here at Pilgrim Church in Cleveland, Peace Act. You're never going to hurt another human being ever again. You're never going to say another harmful word toward another human being ever again. You're never going to think another harmful thought toward another human being ever again. How's that going for you? That's the spiritual life, friends. That's following Jesus. That's just, Gandhi realized then one day, that's just the beginning of nonviolence. He's going, holy Toledo or holy Cleveland. This is a whole new way of life. This is a methodology. This is the spiritual path. This is a universal ethic. No, this is the law of God. These are the politics of God. The way to change the world is bottom-up, people power, grassroots movements of active, creative, loving nonviolence. It's the only way positive social change happens. War doesn't work. It always leads to further wars. Violence doesn't work. It always leads to further violence. Peaceful means are the only way to a peaceful future and the God of peace. And Gandhi and Dr. King, learning from Jesus, are trying to teach us to not only to live that, but to teach it and proclaim it, come what may. Right? And it's fantastic. And Gandhi has these spectacular lines. Like, I found this sentence of his: nonviolence is the highest form of human consciousness. That's very profound teaching if you think about that. Is he right? And you know, Dr. King then comes along and says Gandhi is the greatest Christian who ever lived. And King got in a lot of trouble for saying that. It's all because of this use of this word nonviolence. I think the language is so co-opted that love and peace, what do they mean anymore? We're all for peace. Everybody's for peace as we're bombing and killing somebody today. You know, there's a lot of wars happening, not just the ones we're supposed to be angry about. So I think of these great teachers, Gandhi and Dr. King, and I've been struggling with what does it mean to practice and live and teach and proclaim nonviolence. So in my book, The Nonviolent Life, and I brought some other copies of some other of my books downstairs, and I don't know if Doug told you this, but if we're good, we get cookies and coffee afterwards downstairs, but it wasn't set in stone. I'm trying to make you laugh again, and it's not working. Anyway, in my book, The Nonviolent Life, I propose, if you're with me here, that nonviolence requires 3 simultaneous attributes, okay? You have to do all 3 to reach the level of Gandhi and Kingian nonviolence. Number 1, total nonviolence to yourself. From now on, we're going to be nonviolent to ourselves. We're not going to beat ourselves up. We're not going to, inside in that tape that runs in our minds, be saying how horrible we are, or when we make a mistake, beat ourselves up. My friend Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a great Zen Buddhist master, used to say, just look deeply within. Why, when I left the Pilgrim church, did I want to run somebody over in the parking lot? Again, I thought you'd laugh at that, but maybe I touched a nerve. We're going to non-cooperate with our own inner violence. We're all wounded people of violence. Every human being on the planet now, because of this insane culture, thousands of years of violence, whether it's from your own family or just the culture of racism and sexism and the wars around us, or whatever happened to us. So it's internalized and ingrained, and you and I are going to instead try to cultivate interior nonviolence, to make peace with ourselves, to make peace with the God of peace, to allow the God of peace to dwell within us. Isn't that lovely? But what I'm talking about then is living out the social, economic, and political implications of us having a sacred nonviolent heart, becoming a truly peaceful person. At the same time, number 2, you're practicing meticulous interpersonal nonviolence toward every human being on the planet, and all the creatures, and Mother Earth. I'm serious, because that was what Gandhi and Dr. King and Dorothy Day and all our saints said, and by the way, they were just getting all of this from Jesus. How's that going for you? Think about the one, we're all for peace. I've been joking this way my whole life, but deep down, we'd all like to get back with a little revenge at somebody. I'm just saying. Again, I thought you'd laugh at that, but I'm that nerve again. Think of the one person who pushes your buttons the most. That person is your guru, your teacher, your spiritual master, because they're exposing your violence. Now you get to practice creative Gandhian, Kingian, Dorothy Dayan nonviolence with that person. You've got to figure out how to be creative and disarm him or her, and allow them to disarm you. We're the ones who need to be disarmed. So really to have an attitude of total nonviolence toward every human being and the creatures and Mother Earth. And third, at the same time, you have to have one foot in the global grassroots movements of peace, justice, disarmament, and creation. And so I know a lot of you are involved, and I thank you for all the great good you do, and keep doing it with as much nonviolence and love as you can muster from now on. And if you're not involved, pick a cause and get involved. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something, and do your something with a lot of love. And for those of you in Cleveland, join Cleveland Peace Action. That's a good start. So why I'm talking this way is that Gandhi and King teach a kind of holistic nonviolence that is pretty darn rare. There's a lot of people in the United States who say, I am working for peace and I am going to be a really peaceful person. And they don't do anything for the world. That is not peacemaking. That is not nonviolence. My friend Archbishop Tutu would say, you're the problem. Your silence is complicity with the system. That's precisely what the culture of war and killing wants, is us to just be privately doing our own thing. The flip side of it is the rest of us who are hardcore activists. And we're mean and mad and nasty and really horrible people of violence to ourselves and others, and that's not nonviolence and peacemaking either. And Gandhi and King and all the great people were trying to figure that out, learning from nonviolence is at the heart of every religion. Nonviolence at every level. We're talking total nonviolence here. That's what I'm interested in. That's what I've learned from really exploring this full time and meeting all the great peacemakers of the planet. And I've seen it in their lives. So Gandhi comes along and says, Jesus is the greatest person of nonviolence in the history of the world. And I still love that so much. And then poor Gandhi says, and the only people on the whole planet who don't know that Jesus is nonviolent are Christians. It's a big question. Is Gandhi right? No, if you're going to nod your head, if Jesus is, first of all, if there's a trace of violence in Jesus, I want nothing to do with him. We don't need him. We got violence down pat. Even the best of us, we're all addicted to violence. It's just, we're all crazy. We've all been so wounded. But if Gandhi is saying this person, Jesus of Nazareth, is the greatest person of nonviolence in the history of the world, and the Christian community has long said he's what? The epitome of nonviolence? The incarnation of the God of peace and universal love? Now we're getting somewhere. This is good news, and no wonder he was killed. And I think things are bad, but buckle your seatbelts. They're going to be getting much, much worse. And you need something more than America and the propaganda machine and the world of violence and death as a methodology to survive. And I'm proposing in this book that you put your chips on the nonviolence of Jesus. And all the great practitioners and saints, especially Gandhi and King and people like Dorothy Day and Dorothy Kazel from, I think she was here, and the four church women and all. So that's what I was writing about, and that's what I want to talk about if you can stand it. Can I go on a little bit about Matthew, Mark, and Luke about the book? That's a yes? You're not hoping I'm done? So Matthew is written, as you know, for the Jewish faith people who are converting to Christianity. So it has definitely a focus on the Judaism of Jesus and how Jesus is the fulfillment. In other words, we found the Messiah. The problem is he's not quite the guy we were hoping for. He's not going to overthrow the empire and kill everybody and establish Zion in a nice new war in Jerusalem that we are all still hoping for in the second coming. Such insanity. Matthew says, in effect, from the beginning, this guy is totally nonviolent, a nonviolent Messiah of suffering, universal love. And so he frames Jesus as the new Moses with the new commandments and coming down the mountain, and he gives his basic campaign platform speech called the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Gandhi said is the greatest teachings of nonviolence in the history of the world. So Gandhi is saying, I want to be a person of nonviolence. He said this in South Africa 124 years ago. So I have to read my handbook. The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, is a how to be a human being book. Don't think of it as pious platitudes or holy spiritual teachings. It's like, this is how you live. Do these exact things. So Gandhi read from the Sermon on the Mount every morning and every evening the last 45 years of his life. Did you all know that? Did you know he's not a Christian? Did I hear that some of you might be Christians? No, you're not, so you're off the hook. I sometimes on bad days think, was Gandhi the only person in history who read the Sermon on the Mount every single day? And I know this. I went to India for a month with Arun Gandhi, who was raised by Gandhi. He just died last year, my friend. We went for a month and lived in all the places where Gandhi lived and died. And, at the main ashram in Ahmedabad, there's so there'd be 400 people in the community there of nonviolence. And at 5 to 6 a.m. and at 5 to 6 p.m. every day, Gandhi got in this specific little area and they sang a hymn of love and read from Matthew 5. Arun showed me where it happened. He saw this happen. And you and I are supposed to be Christians. And he's saying this is it. So let me just I'll say a few words about the Sermon on the Mount. But my invitation to you is go and read the Sermon on the Mount. Like for the next 20 years and get back to me. Okay, the next 30 years. Okay, be like Gandhi. Read it every day till the day you die. Remember, he was killed going to the prayer service in the movie. He would have read from Matthew 5. I kid you not. It begins with the Beatitudes, which we've heard all our lives. Happy are or blessed are the poor. Isn't that nice? Baloney. In the Aramaic, okay, Jesus didn't speak Hebrew or Greek. He spoke the lost language of the Aramaic, and there was this French scholar who spent his whole life trying to study it, and all he could come up with was the Beatitudes and the Lord's Prayer. And he translates the word we translate as blessed are to be, are you sitting down? I'm going to wait for you to sit down because it's too shocking. It's not happy are. It's not blessed are. It's arise, get up, get moving, and start walking, all you who are poor in spirit, you mournful, you meek, gentle, nonviolent, all of you who hunger and thirst for justice, arise and walk forth, all of you who are merciful, pure of heart, peacemakers, persecuted for working for justice, and insulted and called every name in the book. Arise and walk forth and rejoice and be glad. Now you get to be like Gandhi and Dr. King. Isn't that fantastic? That's what this scholar says. I invite you to remember that. Because that sounds to me like Jesus. Empowering oppressed people on the outskirts of this horrible empire. And that's why he built the movement. Because he's saying, look, they want you to think there's nothing you can do. Be depressed, be despairing, be angry, be afraid, and be hopeless. You're powerless. That's why Martin Luther King, if he were here, would say, no, John doesn't get nonviolence. He defined nonviolence as power. Did you know that? Isn't that fantastic? You have power. So, that's such an incredible way to look at the Beatitudes. And it all leads up to arise and walk forth, you holy peacemakers. Go into the culture of war and make peace. Why? This is what's so spectacular. You are the sons and the daughters of the God of peace. And so the invitation is to claim that as your core fundamental identity. I am, you are the beloved daughter of the creator of the universe. You're the beloved son of the God of peace. Claim it and just say, no, I can't do that. Well, then you're off the hook and you're not following Jesus. And that's a false humility. Real humility is to accept who we are. And that's the beginning of nonviolence. So this leads to the 6 antitheses. And I go through this a lot in the book because I don't think we talk about it enough. Though maybe you do here at Pilgrim because you all are so great. I've heard such wonderful things about you all. But all of Cleveland, all of Ohio, all of the United States, we all have to help our churches reclaim the Sermon on the Mount and become Sermon on the Mount people. So, they say, he says, we read in Matthew, you have heard it said, but I say to you. You have heard it said, thou shalt not kill. Yeah, I heard that, Jesus. I say to you, don't even get angry. What? How dare you say that? I'm so angry. I'm not angry, but I'm really angry. I once said this at a retreat of sisters. And they all blew up at me and stormed out, and that was the end of the retreat. I was given a 3-day retreat on the Sermon on the Mount, and that was the end of it. Well, we don't want anything to do with that. Well, I'm tired of being raging, angry, afraid, anxious, worried, shall I continue, violent, hateful, American. I want to be in this nonviolence for the long haul. And that's why I knew everybody like Coretta Scott King, Thich Nhat Hanh, Desmond Tutu, the Berrigans, all of them were a lot of fun to be with. Mother Teresa was nuts. So was Desmond Tutu. He shouldn't have been allowed out in public. There's another way to work for peace and justice besides anger. And Gandhi is the only one I can really point to who consciously did that. In the early 1900s, he said, I'm just going to do what the guy said. I don't understand it. I'm going to do what he said and live out that way because he's at least as smart as we are. Okay, I know that's hard to take. Jesus is at least as smart as us. He's a genius. And so the week before he was assassinated, they said to Gandhi, what's the greatest thing you did in your life? I took Jesus seriously and I conserved my anger and I channeled it into positive nonviolent action instead of yelling at people. And the more you're involved in the movement, the angrier you can be, the more you find out how bad things are all over the whole planet. So if you read the Sermon on the Mount carefully, and this was not even my point, but I'm saying it, so here it goes. Jesus instructs us on everything, including the emotional life of nonviolence. Avoid these two emotions, he says very clearly, anger and fear. Jesus, those are our best things. You won't last long in the movement. Look at the 60s anti-Vietnam War students. You get so angry and you burn out. But, he says, cultivate these two emotions. I didn't make any of this up, by the way. It's right there in Matthew, and Gandhi's taken it. He says, I encourage you to practice these two emotions. Well, you already heard me say them, so I don't need to repeat them. Grief and joy. That's the path of nonviolence. Blessed are those who mourn, who are grieving. Because nonviolence begins with the truth that we are all one, every human being, and if you want to go deep into our common human unity, you widen it to see that we're even one with the creatures and with Mother Earth. It's so beautiful. You can never hurt anybody. And so you're grieving, because we're killing each other all over the planet, and the creatures, and Mother Earth. That's the beginning. That's why I remember my friend Daniel Berrigan, when I was a kid, he began a weekend retreat. His first sentence was, peacemaking begins with grief. And what I'm getting at here is I think we project all our insane inner anger and violence onto Jesus. That's one of the things that's happened. And I don't think there's any in the gospel. And you can ask me about it and I can cite you chapter and verse. He's not angry. And that's our problem. He's lamenting. He's grieving, which is a very different and much more powerful thing because his heart is being broken all the time, which means his heart is widening, not just into empathy, but into universal compassion, which is if you go deep into holy universal compassion, it always leads to public action for justice, and disarmament, and creation. So he says, this is the teaching. I say don't even get angry. Don't even go near anything in violence inside of you. He's trying to cut the roots of war inside of us. So he says, when you're going to the altar, whatever you do, stop what you're doing and don't pray. Don't go near God. I didn't make that up. Look it up. It's like 14 sentences into the Sermon on the Mount. Don't pray. Don't worship God. When you think of all the people you have hurt, the wreckage you have left in your lifetime. It's powerful stuff, friends. It's such deep practical wisdom. So don't go near God, and in the Greek is the commandment. Katagalite. Go and be reconciled and apologize and make amends to all the people you have hurt who are angry with you. Heal them. It's your responsibility to make up for all the wrong we've done. Then go to the altar and bring your gift and worship God. That's really deep and beautiful spirituality of nonviolence. But that's not the one I wanted to talk about. The fifth antithesis, which is what Gandhi read every single day, and it's what we've seen in the news this morning and last night. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Well, there it is. Which Gandhi said just makes the whole world blind and toothless. I mean, isn't that what Gaza is about? This horrific killing by Hamas. 1,500 people. So let's kill 35,000 people. That ought to bring peace and show them. And let's kill them and them and them. But of course, it's all about money. And it's all about us, the United States. And there's a lot of billions of dollars to be made by killing children. Some people can get really rich on this if you have a whole culture of mass murder, which just leads the whole world to death. It's what we're talking about is death as a social methodology. But I say to you, so this is the sentence in the original Greek, and I consider this a commandment, and I invite you to memorize it. I think it's Matthew 5, verse 37 or 38. Offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. That's it. That's the teaching. And I'm just proposing to you that if you want to practice the peace and nonviolence of Jesus, that's the bottom line. Why? Because Gandhi read that sentence every day. That's the sentence. Why did Gandhi read it every day? Can I digress for a moment? No? You've had it already? You're okay. I just find this so interesting. To me, my heroes are the abolitionists. I don't know if you really studied them. I have. And William Lloyd Garrison and Douglass and these great, great, great peacemakers and the women of Seneca Falls. 200 years ago, Garrison stands up in Rochester in a church like this and gives this very famous speech that was heard around the whole world. And he says, "Today we are announcing the abolition of slavery." Everybody just laughs at him. What are you, nuts? You can't get rid of slavery. Some people aren't people. It's in the Bible. No. A new world is coming. He reclaims the imagination of what it means to be a human being. And that's how you build a movement. Well, our job is harder than theirs. All they had to do was end slavery. What we're doing, and what Peace Action is doing, what Pilgrim Church, what all of you holy peacemakers are doing, are standing up in Cleveland and saying, "Excuse me, today we are announcing the abolition of war itself, and poverty, and racism, and gun violence, and sexism, and torture, and executions, and nuclear weapons, and fossil fuels, and the extinction of the animals, and all violence, all structures of injustice." And everybody's going to say, "Well, you're nuts." Trust me, they will say that. And you're going to go, "No." And we're going to help each other reclaim the imagination of peace. That's what Jesus does. So Gandhi is, where did he get his passion for that sentence? Well, the abolitionists were really reinventing the church. They were really the ones, thanks to the Quaker women in England, and the Anabaptists and the Mennonites, the peace churches, who began to unpack the Sermon on the Mount. And, in England, they did it without a civil war. What happened here? We renounced what they called passive resistance. If you lead up to 1850s, the movement, not split, they all renounced everything, their methodology they've been using. William Lloyd Garrison was all for the Civil War. Let's just kill him. And only one person said no in the movement. He was like, "Is it okay if I'm telling you this story? You're like, it's 6 o'clock already." Okay. It'd be like Andrew Young, Dr. King's assistant. His name is Aidan Below. Do you know him? We would not be here without this great man. He said, "No, I'm going to just stick with Jesus, even though it doesn't make sense." Thank God he did. And he maintained total nonviolent resistance during the Civil War. I want to end slavery, but I don't want to kill insane white people. And he lived to be about into the 1880s. And when he was in his late 80s, his son published a 50-page document of his philosophy of nonviolence. And the father dies, and there's his house and community in Connecticut is now a museum, which nobody goes to, Aidan Below. And the son takes the 50-page paper and privately publishes it and mails it off to the 100 most important people on the planet. Queen Victoria, the Pope, Rutherford B. Hayes, your guy, people like that, I think. And who's the most famous person on the planet? Leo Tolstoy. He mails a copy with a letter to Tolstoy in Moscow. Tolstoy gets this thing, reads it that day, and says, "I'm never writing or doing anything again." except for Matthew 5, verse 38. Did you know that? It's right, and it's incredible what Tolstoy, the brightest light in the world, is why we're here. So he writes a 500-page book about nonviolence called The Kingdom of God is Within You, and says, the first sentence is like, I got in the mail this paper by the son of the famous Aiden Below from the great abolitionist in the States, and then just publishes it. And his goal, till his death, is to convert the horrible, evil Russian Orthodox Church, which is just a servant of the state and the czars, just like the American churches serve the Pentagon. There's no difference. And he failed utterly until 2 years before his death, he gets this letter in the mail saying, Dear Mr. Tolstoy, I read your book, and I'm going to spend my whole life on that sentence and teach the world nonviolence. Mohandas K. Gandhi. We know that because Tolstoy turned to his young secretary and said, in effect, I can die at peace now. This is going to be the most important person in the world. So Aiden Below and Tolstoy gave their lives to offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. So Gandhi's starting to work on that too. That's why I'm stressing this so much. If you want to be about peace at the Jesus Gandhi level, you got to go deep into this. So Gandhi's reading this every day and he's going, wait a second. How do you do that? What does this guy mean? And that's where he talks about infinite creativity, because it's the Spirit of God working through us. We don't know how to do that, but he wants us to figure out how to do that. And so the world says someone's going to do violence to you. You got two responses. You fight back with violence or you run away and do nothing. And Gandhi learns from Jesus a third alternative. There's always a nonviolent alternative. And the world is always saying, no, you can only be violent back. But Gandhi just says violence is just, cowardice and fear and infidelity to God. No, you have to stand your ground. You're going to do violence to me, and I'm not going to use the means of my opponent, but I'm not running away. I'm going to say, hey, in the Spirit of God, practicing love, I'll speak the truth of our common humanity and say, why are you doing that? Until you drop your gun, you repent of your intent to do violence, and we reconcile and are friends for the rest of our lives. That's the methodology of Jesus and Gandhi. And then one day Gandhi says, oh my God, I think Jesus intended this for the nations and the whole human race. Now, Dr. King says no one had thought that until Gandhi, which is very tragic. If you really think about that. So Gandhi's going, can I get the British Empire to leave India nonviolently based on this sentence? And he does. And there have been 85 nonviolent revolutions since. And now we know through the brilliant work of the great Harvard social scientist Erica Chenoweth that where active, creative, nonviolent resistance is used in the face of tyranny and war and oppression, it works and it leads to deeper nonviolent democracies. It's fantastic. That's why Gandhi, on the flip side, spoke about what's happening to us. He says if democracies do not move deeper into nonviolence, Gandhi said this in the 1920s, if they do not begin to institutionalize nonviolent conflict resolution, if you continue to spend trillions of dollars of war instead of billions, not just for justice, but you educate every human being in the methodology of nonviolent conflict resolution, and then you create nonviolent civilian defense teams, and then you work toward global nonviolent conflict resolution. If they don't do that, democracies have to move into total fascism. Gandhi said that 100 years ago. That's what we're seeing happening today. Well, I just invite us to ponder that, and thank you for letting me go on so long about that. And that's not even the climax of the Sermon on the Mount. The next one is, you have heard it said, love your countrymen and hate your enemies, but I say to you, love your enemies. Agape, unconditional nonviolent love toward the people declared expendable by your nation state. It's not the person at work or the church or someone in Cleveland that you don't like. It's nation-state language. He wants us to engage in universal love. Who are the people our nation-state is trying to kill? Well, Hiroshima, Vietnam, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, Grenada, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Palestine, South Africa, shall I continue? All the nations of Africa. All the world now with our nuclear weapons. So we practice universal love. It's the most political sentence in the entire Bible. And the scholars say no one had ever said that before in history. Isn't that fantastic? And it makes sense. But what I was always interested in was why. And there, in the most political sentence of the Bible, Jesus gives the greatest definition or description of the mystery of God. Didn't we just agree? Didn't we just say, blessed are the peacemakers? Your sons and daughters, you go into the culture of war and make peace because you're sons and daughters of the God of peace. Love your enemies because you are the sons and daughters of the God who lets the sun rise on the good and the bad and the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. Spectacular teaching. God practices universal nonviolent love, and so we do the same. God, according to the scandalous spirituality of Jesus, is nonviolent. Do you want a nonviolent God? Do you want a God of universal love who loves everyone? That's why we want to get with the program. This is good news, folks. You know, it's not just, it's everything. It's spiritual and political, and it's, I think, our way out. So Matthew then just goes on, and he's teaching this, and then he's modeling it, and then he's training them, and he's saying it's not going to work, and Matthew has these beautiful lines like, you know, come to me all you labor, because I am gentle and humble and meek of heart. Thomas Merton says, meekness is the biblical word for Kingian nonviolence. And so Matthew is saying Jesus doesn't have a mean bone in his body. He's totally nonviolent. You just touch him and you're healed. The rest of us are full of violence to various degrees. He has no violence in him. That's where we're getting at. That's how you are able to say spectacular teachings like this. And we don't want any of it. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell the same story. John rewrites the whole story and actually wrote a whole other book on John. But it's a very, very different story. Matthew, Mark, and Luke says Jesus is organizing the poor and oppressed people of Galilee in the outback. And they turn and march to Jerusalem. Jesus thinks he's Gandhi. Jesus thinks he's Martin Luther King. Who does he think he is? I'm still trying to make you laugh, Doug, George. It's not working here. And he marches on a grassroots campaign of nonviolence and goes into the temple where the religious authorities are working with the empire to oppress all the people, steal all their money, to get them to worship God. You have to give all your life savings to buy a lamb, to kill one of the 150,000 lambs to worship God. But you carry that evil money, and we need to change your evil money into our holy money. That's going to cost you a little extra. And he turns over the tables of the bankers in the temple, where they're making a fortune, and where it's how the empire controls the population. He doesn't hit anybody, yell anybody, get angry at anybody, scream at anybody, whip anybody, kill anybody, or drop any bombs. Can I just please clarify that? You know, Truman said Jesus was violent in the temple, so I can drop the bomb on Hiroshima. No. As someone who's been arrested maybe 100 times, but actually jailed 85 times and in court many times, you don't go into civil disobedience action screaming and yelling. You know, I've been arrested at the Pentagon, the White House, the Capitol, the Supreme Court, as you do, the State Department. I'm banned from pretty much all your favorite military bases in the country. Thank you very much. And, you know, you are meticulously peaceful and nonviolent. You're really like Gandhi and Dr. King. Otherwise, they're just going to kill you or, you know, hurt you right from the get-go, and that's not our message. Jesus is the same way. This is total nonviolent civil disobedience, classic. And, but wow, is he dangerous and a disturber of the peace and a revolutionary. And if you're doing that in the temple, you're going to be arrested and tortured and killed. It's not brain surgery. It's not rocket science, Mark, wherever you are. So, you know, and this is the guy we follow. You know, and if he's upset about the temple and saying, you've turned this house of prayer into a den of thieves, what would he say about our nuclear weapons, our wars, the way we treat the poor around here in Cleveland and around the world, our gun violence, torture, executions, fossil fuels? I mean, it's just incredible where we are now on the brink of destroying the planet. So I was saying all of this once in a church in Denver, in a packed church, and this nice lady said, John, this stuff on nonviolence is really interesting. I think it's very intriguing. I think you're onto something there. This was 20 years ago during the bombing of Iraq. And she goes, and me personally, peace, I'm a big fan of peace. But John, sometimes you just got to kill somebody. That's the way they talk out in the West, and that's what we all think too. The church was right in the year 315 when Constantine, supposedly the emperor, converted to Christianity, which is an illegal movement, considered the same as Hamas. It's a threat to the empire, even though it's total Gandhian nonviolence, and no one understands it then or now. And he says, okay, now you're all legal, and now you can all fight for the Roman Empire, so throw out the Sermon on the Mount. And you should study Cicero, the pagan, who comes up with justified reasons for mass murder, called the just war theory. And that was the beginning of the end for us. We've had 1,700 years as if Jesus said, love your enemies, but if they're really bad and you follow these 7 conditions, bomb the hell out of them. It's not what Jesus said. You know, on another note, about 10 years ago, some friends of mine and I, for a Gandhian experiment on nonviolence, wrote to the Pope and said, hey, can we talk about nonviolence? And gosh, we got a listening with Pope Benedict. And then he stepped down and Pope Francis invited us there, and we had the first ever conference on nonviolence in the Vatican, April 2016. And we issued a statement with all the Vatican muckety mucks and Pope Francis and the 80 Catholics from around the world. I think there were 3 or 4 from the US. To attend, you had to be in and out of jail, under constant death threat, or personally end a war. That was the requirements to come to the conference. I didn't know such great people existed. It was so beautiful. And the statement was, there is no such thing as the just war theory. And Pope Francis has just made radical changes in the Catholic Church. But we're still trying to get him to write an encyclical like Laudato Si, which he wrote on the environment, to write about Jesus and nonviolence. So wish us luck. So I said to this woman, well, what comes next? He's at the table. He takes the bread, my body broken for you, my cup poured out of my blood shed for you. You know, we've heard it a million times, those of us who go to church. And if he were a good American or a good Roman, what should he have said? Jesus should have said what all the leaders of every nation in history have always said: go break their bodies for me. Go shed their blood for me. No, friends, my body broken for you, my blood shed for you. Do this. Matthew calls it the new covenant. It's a new covenant of total nonviolence. Every time you go to church and participate in communion or Eucharist or break bread, you're entering into God's methodology of nonviolence, our preference for accepting suffering and death rather than inflicting suffering and death, if you understand the art of peacemaking and nonviolence. It's very close to the art of war making and violence. It's just that we don't kill people, we would rather be killed as we work to end the killing. So that didn't go over very well with her in Denver. So I said, well then, in the Garden of Gethsemane, here come the horrible Roman soldiers, and you can see it in Matthew. Imagine like 100 of them with all the religious authorities, the chief priests, the Sadducees, there's Judas, and they all have like 100 swords. And Jesus, let's say, to be generous, he's got 50 men and women in his community around him. And they're hiding out at night at this garden above the valley overlooking the city. And they're a wanted movement, and Jesus knows his time is up. Like, you know, it's not, yeah. And here they are with the swords. And what is Peter thinking? If there's ever a just war in all of human history, If violence is ever divinely sanctioned, if there's ever a moment to kill where God wants us to kill, where it's right to kill for God's sake, it's here in the Garden of Gethsemane in terms of all of human history, and he's right. We got to kill to protect our guy. The Holy One's in trouble. And just as he goes to kill to protect the Holy One, the commandment comes down, put down the sword. Friends, those are the last words of Jesus to the church, according to the gospel. It's the last thing the men and women around him heard him say before he died. Think about it. I didn't make that up. Read it. You never hear it talked about that like that. And it's the first time they understood just how serious he is about nonviolence. They had 3 years of the Sermon on the Mount and constant teachings of don't be afraid, love one another, love your enemies, be as compassionate as God. And Peter is ready to kill, but he's not ready to die for Jesus, just like us. I invite you to hear that commandment to yourself. Who is it? How do you want to take up a sword? Because we're all being brainwashed to kill. Luke ups the ante, actually, if you study this, as I have, because he makes it even more dramatic. They probably, if you think through, they probably all have swords, right? The 100 of them. And if there's the 50 of us, and this is all happening very fast. I don't know if you've ever been in violence. I've been in many war zones, have been interrogated by death squads, have been talking when bombs are falling around me. It's just what I do. And it's horrible, and it happens fast. And everybody says to me, well, what are you saying? Are you going to intervene? What would you do if somebody came and was about to kill your grandmother? And all this? Well, here they are. Peter takes up the sword. In Luke, he cuts off the ear of the slave of the high priest. And right there you see the victims of war are always the poor and oppressed, this poor slave. And, Jesus in Luke jumps in and intervenes. What's about to happen? If Peter has cut off that high priest servant's ear, there's about to be, in 5 seconds, a bloodbath where all the 50 disciples are going to have their heads chopped off. And Jesus jumps in between them all. Maybe all the 50 disciples had swords too. And he says in Luke, stop, no more of this. And he prevents a massacre and saves everybody's life. And they all run away from Jesus. They want nothing to do with him. I could go on and on at length, and I have, I'm sorry. I'll just say that about Matthew. He ends, I think it's so funny, they killed Jesus brutally. And there's these 10 strange verses, like, they think, well, these uppity movement people, they're bound to do something. Maybe they're going to steal the body and play he rose from the dead. We better go to Pilate. So they go to Pilate, the religious authorities, they have a big confab. And Pilate says, you're right. So they send 100 armed soldiers again to the tomb with the Roman centurion himself. This is no joke. They're standing there with their swords all night. And they got the big rock. He's buried behind the rock. And they put the imperial seal of Caesar on the rock, and it says in Latin, and I quote, "We killed you, you're dead, now stay there." Resurrection is illegal. Resurrection is civil disobedience. He breaks out. You're not buying this for a second, but I didn't make it up. If you read it, he's out there causing good trouble to this day. Mark doesn't have any of this. No infancy narrative, no Sermon on the Mount, nothing. It's just nonstop action. He immediately the word immediately is used 41 times. He immediately went over there and he caused trouble, and he went over there, caused trouble, and he immediately went over there. That's why I call Mark a nonstop action thriller. And Mark's, in a sentence, here's the Gospel of Mark. Mark is saying that this is what he calls for, radical discipleship to the totally nonviolent Jesus as permanent nonviolent resistance to the entire culture of violence, war, empire, and death. That's your discipleship. You resist everything from now on. That's your obedience to the God of peace, and that's how you welcome God's reign of peace. Luke, I'll just end with 2 stories from Luke. Luke has Luke 4, which no one else has. And Jesus walks into the synagogue in Nazareth, and then there's just a few rabbis there, and he opens up the most radical, revolutionary writings in the whole Bible, the end of the book of Isaiah, and he reads, "The Spirit of the God of peace is upon me, to bring good news to all the poor of the earth, to liberate all captives and oppressed peoples of the whole earth, to give vision to the blind," hello, every human being who ever lives, we're all blind, "and to proclaim the Jubilee year." What? You know, the Jubilee year? I'm hoping you've all studied that from Leviticus, because it's so weird. I mean, who cares? Every 7 years times 7 years, on the 7th of the 7th year, on the other 9 year, on the last day of the year, December 31st, you just gather all the money of the planet together. What? You're going to gather all the money of the planet together by the end of the year. Let's see, that's all the money of Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, all the war makers, all the generals, all the dictators, all the tyrants, all the corporate honchos, he who must not be named, everybody. On December 31st, you take everybody's money, and on January 1st, all the money of the planet is equally redistributed to all 8.5 billion people on the planet, so that every human being has equal good food, clean water, good housing, plumbing, total employment, full education, health care. What am I missing? Dignity. This is pure revolution. This is so far beyond capitalism and communism and socialism and republicanism or even the Democratic Party. It's just, that's why I think when Jesus says, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing," he's launching, according to Luke, his permanent, never-ending revolution of total nonviolence that continues to this day. And everything in Luke comes out from that proclamation. It's spectacular. And of course, they try to kill him immediately, because we can't have that. And they eventually succeed. And I'll end with Luke 2:10, which is my favorite, where he sends the 72 ahead of him in pairs. It's classic 1930s labor movement organizing. See, that's why I keep saying he's just like Gandhi on the Salt March or King on the Selma to Montgomery March. He sends them ahead of them. And that's what you and I are doing. That's our job as peace movement people, as Pilgrim peacemakers in Cleveland and Ohio and the whole country. Go. I am sending you as lambs into the midst of wolves. Innocent, totally unarmed, nonviolent lambs, surrounded by people of violence at all times. That's his image of us. How could he be more graphic to talk about nonviolence? And so don't transform into a wolf, or at least disarm your inner wolf. Or you're not liking all my poetry here. That's not okay. Never mind. Be nonviolent, and you have 3 jobs. Number 1, if you read Luke 10. So he's saying, everywhere you go, you say peace to people, peace, and your peace will stay there, and they'll say peace to you, and you're living in peace, and you're teaching peace, and you're spreading peace. You do 3 things. Number 1, heal all the victims of violence. Well, that's everybody, and that's what you're doing here in Cleveland. From now on, you're healers, and we're all victims of violence. Number 2, expel all the demons of violence from everybody. We're all possessed. That's your job here in Cleveland. Friends, it's like this is how you say it. You don't have to be possessed by the NRA anymore, or the Republican Party, or Trump, or America, or the military, and more. You're free of all of that. You can live free. That's what we're called to free. And third, everywhere you go, you're to say, the kingdom of God is at hand. Gandhi said, the kingdom of God is nonviolence. So wherever you go, you're going to be saying, like me, that's what I'm trying to do. This is the point of all our conversations from now on. Folks, how are we going to end all the wars? It's like the abolitionists work to end all, that's what they gave their lives to. We're new abolitionists. Ending all wars, all violence, all guns, all military support by the United States for the wars on all sides, selling weapons on all sides, fossil fuels and oil, which is destroying the planet, This is our life's mission. And what's so spectacular about Luke is they come back and it says they rejoiced. They're like, hey, Jesus, this stuff works. And he gets all carried away and goes, yeah, I saw Satan fall like lightning from the sky. Well, Luke can't come out and say that's the end of the Roman Empire, but Satan is just a code word for empire. Whenever people organize bottom-up people, power, grassroots movements, the culture is collapsing. We're kicking out the legs from under it. That's our job from violence and war and killing. Because this always works, and the more we give our lives to it, the more contagious nonviolence becomes. That's why if Jesus were there in Montgomery, he sees Rosa Parks refusing to get up from her seat, he would say segregation just fell. Because she's given her life to it. And she's a movement person. That's what your job is in Cleveland, to create a nonviolent Cleveland, a nonviolent Ohio, a nonviolent world by proclaiming the reign of God. So Jesus says, don't rejoice because the demons have power over you. You have power over them. Rejoice because your names are written in heaven and you have power now. So it says they rejoiced, that he rejoiced, and they're all getting carried away. Friends, it's the only time in the 4 Gospels where Jesus is happy. It's the only time, because they did what he wanted. They went out and joined the movement and built and spread the grassroots movement of nonviolence for justice, disarmament, creation. So I encourage you to keep at it and go deep as you can into Gandhian, Kingian, Christian nonviolence and spread it as far as you can. And proclaim it and keep inviting everybody to disarm and just surrender more and more to God. And when you're having a bad day and you can't take it anymore because everybody's crazy, keep at it. You know, keep doing the good because it's good. Do what's right because it's right. As Dan Berrigan said, we leave the outcome in God's hands and we build relationships with one another and love one another and have friends and build the beloved community as we seek a new world of nonviolence. And even then, when you can't take it anymore and you're tired and discouraged and depressed, keep at it just to make the poor guy happy. Thanks for listening. Wow. It's 6 o'clock. It's not 6. You want to say something? Go ahead, say something.
No. I just want to know if there's any questions. Do we have a mic that we can pass to the congregation members?
You and then you in the white shirt. Yeah, go ahead. Real loud. What's your name again? Well, I don't either. The purpose of Dr. King in Selma, according to Daniel Berrigan, who was there, who heard Dr. King say this, I can't find it in any of the writings. Dr. King stood up there in a church just like this and said, his definition of the church is the place you go from. I find that very profound. I go on at length in Luke 3 in the book where does Jesus learn all this? He learns it from his mother, according to Luke. The 3 teachings, the 3 spiritual movements of nonviolence. Mary and the Annunciation, you remember the nice Christmas story. She's a person of contemplative nonviolence. She's praying and has experience of God. But the key is she says, behold, I'm the servant of the God of peace. I do whatever God wants. So what? Let it be done. I'm going to hit something at some point here. She's a contemplative of nonviolence. And therefore she knows her identity. Jesus takes that and expands it. Says, you are the sons and daughters of the God of peace. So you go into the public world of war and make peace. I do God's. That leads to the second movement. According to Luke, this is the beginning of Luke. Contemplative nonviolence leads to Mary and the Visitation as active nonviolence. She reaches out and serves someone in need. Isn't that interesting? Once you encounter God, you get out and you serve people in need. Elizabeth, and then they start talking about God and they get full of joy. And once you serve those in need through active nonviolence, as you all are doing, that leads to the third movement of the spiritual life. Mary and the Magnificat as prophetic nonviolence. To be, and I lived in El Salvador with the Jesuits who were all later assassinated. Maybe some of you remember that. I lived there in 85. They were brutally killed in 89, my friends. They talked a lot about the prophetic church because they were all being killed, and Romero was their teacher. And they said amazing things. Things like, well, I get that you can't say, I'm a prophet. Yeah, excuse me. I'm a prophet. I know, thank you. No, but you could say we're a prophetic community. Now we're getting somewhere. That's what Dr. King was doing in the civil rights movement. And being a prophetic means speaking out publicly. But how do you speak out publicly, and what are you saying? First of all, you're listening to God. And the only thing God is talking about is peace, love, and nonviolence. I'm infinitely in love with you. You can be disarmed. I'm disarming you. Go and love everybody. It's not rocket science, Mark. My friend in the back, who's a rocket scientist. This is doable. And so the church is supposed to be the voice of peace and disarmament and nonviolence and sanity to the world. Not any days of the week, as far as I'm concerned. We're afraid. And what's happened is, but you see, I think it may just be our country, because we're 4% of the world's population. We have, 70% of the world's natural resources. We have enough bombs to blow the whole planet up 17 times, and we're intent on doing it. We will do it at the rate, unless we mobilize. We have to build a grassroots movement, Doug, way greater than anything Gandhi or Dr. King did. A global grassroots movement of total nonviolence for disarmament, justice, and creation, the likes of which the world has never seen. That's why peace action has to get mobilized. No, the churches are afraid, they're not practicing the Sermon on the Mount. I think I make the case that the Gospel of John, written 50 years later, why does that community rewrite the story? Which is even better. If it's possible to make the story better, it's because, as I explained in my other book, they write the story of the entire human race is stuck in the culture of death. Lazarus is supposed to be the human race in the tomb, and Jesus is the God of life who says, take away the stone. Humanity, come out of the culture of death. Unbind humanity and let humanity go free. Well, John says, if you read the fine print, the problem is Christians. Because we are the ones who've got these teachings and we don't live up to it. What are we afraid of? Losing money? As I travel the country these last 4 months, I hear about so many ministers and priests and cardinals and bishops who don't say anything because they think that, this is the misconception, that the job is to unite everybody. I can't rock the boat or ruffle the feathers. It's a complete misunderstanding of Jesus. To unite people, you got to stop all the killing and the insanity and the divisions and the segregation starting here in Cleveland. So when Jesus says, you think I've come to bring peace? No, I've come to bring the sword. He's not wanting violence. He says, I have to speak up. I'm the only sane person on the planet, the only nonviolent. You all are crazy. And as a person of total nonviolence in a world of violence is going to be looked at as insane. You're dividing us. So Martin Luther King, in the letter from the Birmingham jail, says, the charge against him by the white ministers is, you're dividing us. You're speaking out and you're bringing division. He's going, you're the most segregated city in the world. I am a doctor lancing a boil on the body politic. How does he come up with these things, Martin? You're so great. And there's going to be pus and it's going to be messing so that the social healing can begin. His writing is incredible. But you see what I'm saying? He's not afraid to speak out. That's the Christian duty. I am totally with you. And that's why I'm speaking out. I was raised to do that by the Berrigans. And as Dan told me when I was 21, it's so powerful. I was practically raised by Daniel and Philip Berrigan. He said, it's not that we're political, it's that we go public with total nonviolence and universal love and universal peace. We let the chips fall where they may. And I can tell you chapter and verse if you want. Even just what happened to me yesterday in Detroit, I better not tell you. It's all exciting. And but having known a lot of people killed in a lot of different wars who spoke out for justice and really studied Jesus, I see that in resurrection, our survival is already guaranteed, that we have nothing to be afraid of, that really this is a question of do we really believe in God or not? And do we really want to follow these teachings or not? And I'm with you saying I'm sick and tired of this culture of violence and insanity. And the cultural war-making churches that support through their silence this insanity. Tutu would be, if he were here, he would wipe the floor with us, and he did in the 80s about the white churches in the United States. So speak out, friends, for Jesus. Just be sure it's really nonviolent, really loving, and really peaceful. And particularly go and meet priests, ministers, bishops, and cardinals. They will never change unless the people organize and teach them. Give them my book. I'm serious. I'm on a campaign trying to reclaim the nonviolence of Jesus to the country. So the man behind us, I hope that helps a little bit.
So you were talking about, I think, building communities of nonviolence.
Yeah.
Building it. I heard you suggest that daily Bible reading and study.
Did I say that?
And like action therefrom. And that, that's the core of doing it. So is that what you're suggesting? That there would be Bible study daily and studying it and reading it in communities and learning from that?
Well, thank you for the question. Again, it's so powerful having witnessed as a kid the Berrigans and grown up at their feet and watching them till their day they died, both of them, about how they lived. And what I learned from them and what I learned from seeing Jesus' teachings, and as I wrote about in my book, are several things. Number one, definitely prayer and meditation. Every day, if you want to be a person of nonviolence, because you're insane. We're all victims of violence, and to me, we're actually addicted to violence and death in various degrees. That's why you could argue that the church is just a 12-step group of Violence Anonymous, and that's what we're having today. And I'm the speaker. Hi, I'm John. I'm addicted to violence. You'll go, hi, John. I tell you my sad story. We're turning to our higher power. We're making restitution and amends and trying to become sober people of nonviolence. So that has to happen by turning to your higher power. So Gandhi spends 1 hour in quiet meditation every morning and every evening. Mother Teresa spent 3 hours. And let me just point out, they're very busy people. So don't tell me you got a big job. I know so many people. I know people who get up at 4 o'clock and meditate for 2 hours. One is a surgeon who's also the head of the medical department for a state, and she has 5 children, and she meditates for 2 hours every day. That's how she does what she does, and how she does it. I call it survival. I don't need it to try to impress you. I need it to be nonviolent because I'm such a violent person. And what I do in my meditation every morning, what I'm trying to say is, first thing for me is, and I see it in the scriptures, in the story of Jesus, is go and be with God and give God all your violence and let God give you the gift of peace and keep disarming you every day. That's a never-ending journey. Second, you need a group. You need friends. That's what I saw from the Berrigans. Jesus is always forming community. You could argue the first thing he does is form a group of friends because he's saying you can't do this on your own. And the more you're on your own, you're going to end up watching the CNN watching the bombs fall on Jerusalem and going, isn't that a shame? That's not nonviolence. That's exactly what the culture wants, because then CNN's making more money. You turn off the TV, you build community through peace and justice groups, since the churches are failing us. But the churches were supposed to be those beloved communities based on the word of peace. And that's why I've been saying around the country, just read the Gospels for the rest of your lives. Don't read the rest of the Bible. I know that sounds scandalous, but we don't even understand the nonviolence of Jesus, and it's so simple and basic. So work on that for at least 30 years. Okay, thirdly, I would say some involvement in public action. I can't tell you what to do, except I can urge you to do something and to keep doing your something, as I said. I do that because when I was with my friend Cesar Chavez, who was the leader of the farm workers shortly before he died, I spent an evening with him talking, and at the end I said to him, if anyone ever says, what do we do? What do I say? And he went like this to me. Again, I was a kid. Cesar Chavez said, tell everybody for the rest of your life, John, public action, public action, public action. Engage in some public action for justice, discernment, and creation. In some ways, it doesn't matter, whatever the issue is, because it's all one. If you're going deep into nonviolence, really Gandhi talked about we're scientists experimenting with nonviolence in a culture of violence, which is what Jesus did too. So I'm talking about prayer, I'm talking about community, and I'm talking about the movement, being involved in the movement. Those are the things that I take, and I think you need, as Christians, gospel study too. Yeah.
Can we go here?
Okay, whatever you want. We'll get to you in a minute. Oh, well, he's saying. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, you were going to say.
Father John, I have a deep moral, ethical dilemma that I would seek your counsel about. I'm glad you brought up politics. We're in an election year. Neither political party really, jives with my moral and political convictions, but I always voted Democrat because it seemed like the lesser of two evils. In light of the fact that the United States government is aiding and abetting a genocide in Gaza right now, over the years my participation included, protest, demonstration, letters to the editor, civil disobedience, and voting. We're going to be voting soon. I could never vote for the other side, Mr. Trump. Voting for a third party or not voting means voting for Mr. Trump, but I cannot in good conscience vote for Mr. Biden because I believe what he is aiding and abetting is evil. Please give me your counsel.
Was there another question out there somewhere? And what's your name? What's your name? Stephanie. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that. And I guess I would say a couple of things. You know, you're talking about your conscience and all the action you've done for justice and peace. And then there's voting that day in November. I mean, I grew up for hearing a million times Dan Barron says, you vote for God and the reign of God every minute of your life. You are all your energy is into justice, disarmament, creation, ending the genocide, ending all U.S. military aid to Israel, dismantling all these nuclear weapons, getting rid of guns, teaching nonviolence morning, noon, and night to the last second you die. You're going to be at this. That's your job. If you follow this guy or Dorothy Day or Dr. King. Now, Dorothy Day never voted, neither did the Berrigans. And it helps to be an ex-con, frankly. You know, it really clarifies your relationship with the government because they take that right away. So, but, just follow your conscience. You answered your own question, But if you vote for Trump, you're clearly moving faster into fascism, but we're headed there. We're already headed toward the destruction of the planet. So that's just one small day. I mean, I'm presuming everybody is way beyond that question. The real question for me is how are we going to engage in nonviolence and build up that global grassroots movements so far beyond the abolitionists and the suffragists, so far beyond Gandhi and Dr. King, that we can really transform this world and not just the country, but the world into abolishing war as a method. It doesn't work. It's destroying us. We're going off the cliff. If you take Dr. King's last words, he's wanting us to be the people that lead humanity back from the brink of non-existence. So that's way beyond any election. This is the rest of our lives. And what I don't talk about anymore, but what if Martin King were here, all he talked about every day, and I've read his speeches, is suffering. You have to give your life for this. And so many millions of Americans say, well, what I do for change is at once every 4 years I vote. Well, then we're doomed. That's not the gospel, by the way. That is not Jesus. And I'm not saying don't vote. I'm saying follow your conscience. Pursue, and you're the nonviolence as you understand it. In fact, to be perfectly honest, Stephanie, are you a Christian? Can I ask you that? Okay, then my personal recommendation, don't listen to this anybody else. I'm just talking to Stephanie. This is a private counseling moment. Stephanie, go ask Jesus what he wants you to do. And he will tell you what to do. If you listen, if you read the Sermon on the Mount, you become the Stephanie that God sees, the peacemaker that God already knows, and that God can use you to bring peace and nonviolence and justice in Cleveland and Ohio and the country and the world in ways that you and I can't tell yet. But we're done. We don't know what to do. We don't even know who we are. That's why I'm saying, go. I'm trying to spend more time in prayer because I see Gandhi did that more than ever, and Dorothy Day, and all our greatest peacemakers. And the ones I knew personally, Tutu and Thich Nhat Hanh especially, very, very devout. And so you'll find what you need to find, and you'll get the strength, and you'll go in a better direction, which I can't tell you, but I can encourage you to go deep. Deep, deep, deep. And that's when you explore your spiritual roots of your calling as a peacemaker. And it's not just protest is part of it. The political world is part of it. Education and public speaking is part of it. Your inner life. All of this. It's really good stuff. Pray for me, Stephanie. Yeah.
This isn't burning at all, brother. I'm completely at peace and tranquility because of the Creator. So this is one of those kind of questions. Looking at the demographic here, how do you not feel the hypocrisy and the lack of diversity of the sort of demographic you're creating through this narrative you're building. Even Jesus says, you know, a tree by the fruit it bears. What fruit is this?
Well, thank you. You're right. What? Yeah. I feel it. I think a lot about Malcolm X said, though, you know, in his autobiography, he said, let sincere white people go and convert all other white people to nonviolence. So that works for me. And, you know, but last week I spoke to 600 African Americans all day in Harlem. That was electrifying. And last month I spoke to 800 African Americans in South Side of Chicago and was working with them. And a couple of years ago, I went to Palestine and spoke to all the leadership and 1,000 Palestinians. I'm trying not to do that, though. You know, personally, you know, I'm a hypocrite and a sinner and a violent person. I have no problem saying all that because I know myself. But I feel like you called to follow the nonviolent Jesus, to practice as deep as I can universal love, universal compassion, universal peace, and total nonviolence. And I feel called to share that as widely as I can with whoever comes and wants to hear it or not, and letting the chips fall as they may. And I don't claim to have any answers about being the one who's going to build up the movement and resolve the movement. And I came here at the invitation to speak about peace and nonviolence. And I'm hoping and praying that it'll help everybody, encourage you on your journey. And I want to tear down the segregation and racism in Cleveland. And I hope we all will do our part to widen the beloved community. But I also want us to connect the dots, like Dr. King said, and see that it means war and nuclear weapons as well, and poverty, and all gun violence, and the death penalty, and now fossil fuels. It's a whole new vision. I think the times are so urgent, and the movements are collapsing left and right, and resorting to violence and anger so fast before my eyes. I'm thinking of my trips to Palestine and around the country, that I'll talk about nonviolence with anybody. And I'm praying for all of you to pray for me that I can become more nonviolent. Thanks so much for listening. God bless you all. I'll see you outside.
So there are snacks downstairs, and we can do a little bit more talking amongst ourselves. And what time do we need to actually be out of here, George, or should I say Catherine? About 15 minutes. Okay, so we have about 15 more minutes to grab some snacks downstairs. And all right. Oh, Nina has a petition for, what is it? Against gerrymandering. Okay, so we'll see Nina. She's got petitions to sign so that we can get a group of people together that want to end gerrymandering